Welcome to Civitai.com, the home of the generative AI art community. If you enjoy this video, please consider hitting us with a like and subscribing, as it'll go a long way in helping us continue to bring you the highest quality AI community content. Please enjoy the video. Welcome to a very special Wednesday edition of a Civitai AiR guest session. We have a very special guest, and to introduce our guest, I'm gonna let Chris, our art director, go ahead and make that introduction for you folks, and then I'm going to turn it over to Ira. But yeah, just so we don't waste any time, Chris, why don't you go ahead and tell these fine people who we have the pleasure of speaking to today.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you, Tyler. Just a quick plug for the Civitai Artist in Residence program first. So I'm Chris, the director of Civitai's Artist in Residence program, and it serves as an incubator and digital studio for the creative exploration of generative AI. What we want to do is support artists in investigating new techniques, applications, and concepts, ultimately breaking new ground by integrating AI into existing studio practices. So you can apply or learn more about the program at air.civitai.com. But a few words about Ira before we kick off today. So we have the distinct pleasure of hosting Ira Greenberg, a current Civitai artist in residence. Ira is a distinguished faculty member at Southern Methodist University. He holds a unique joint appointment in both the Meadows School of the Arts and the Lyell School of Engineering at SMU, where he also serves as the director of the Center of Creative Computation. He's also a visiting research and knowledge exchange fellow at Goldsmiths University of London. Ira holds a BFA from Cornell and an MFA from the University of Pennsylvania. And throughout his career, he's exhibited works with the likes of Braindrops, Feral File, Bright Moments, Verse, and many other galleries and institutions across the world. Among other ventures, he's the founder of mprops.ai. He released the first long-form generative AI NFT collection called The Oracles, and notably, he's also the author of the book Processing, Creative Coding, and Computational Art, which is the first major contemporary art text on the processing programming language, published in 2007. As a professor at SMU, Ira has inspired countless students to create groundbreaking new media and has held residencies and lectured at prestigious institutions worldwide, including Trinity College Dublin, the University of Edinburgh, Goldsmiths University of London, and many more. So with that, we're thrilled to have Ira with us today. So please join me in welcoming Ira Greenberg.
Thanks so much, Chris and Tyler. It's really a privilege and honor to be able to do this. Thank you for also inviting me to do the artist residency, which has already been very productive, and we're excited to continue with that. And thank you, everybody who's in the audience who's taken the time to do this today, to listen. I'm going to show a presentation that I produced a few months ago for a talk at Goldsmiths. I'll go through it maybe a little quicker so I leave plenty of time for Q&A.
Awesome. Boom. Well, Ira, we got your screen on the stream, and if we get any questions, I'll filter them through to you. But yeah, man, I'm really excited to hear this.
Awesome. So let me know if everything, I'm assuming it's going to run smoothly. So I have a feeling, like many people in this room right now listening, that, I never really fit anywhere in school. And so just kind of got through it without completely getting thrown out. And I think part of this is, just I was not really, the science kid, the math kid, the art kid. I was kind of all those things. And I really wasn't good at following rules. And so this field in general, this kind of space of creative computing, which now is a little bit more mainstream, early on, it became kind of a haven for someone like me. And now that the world is sort of caught up, it's been pretty exciting. So I started school thinking I was going to be a doctor, mostly through, I won't say brainwashing, but strong direction from family, and really was doing that, but also could draw as a kid. So I was kind of doing art classes and science classes, was pretty lost. And so this, obviously, I was having a lot more fun drawing the models than I was sitting in science lectures. So it kind of won out, and I quickly became an art major. So I did a BFA and an MFA, as Chris mentioned, both in painting and drawing, really traditional work. The programs I went to were super observational based, so I sat there and I just drew from observation kind of endlessly, and really wanted to master my craft. So I didn't realize it at the time, but I took a fairly scientific approach to drawing, in the sense that I didn't want to invent. I didn't want to really even express myself. I just wanted to learn to almost be like a machine and put down what I was seeing. Of course, there were issues of sensibility and how things were feeling, but I wasn't super conscious of all that at the time. This was, both drawing, painting, everything was observational based. Again, I think, there was a bias expressed through the schools I went to, the teachers I studied with, the people I was sort of, I wanted to study with. And it was all about kind of visual data that you would record on this kind of artificial two-dimensional surface. So it was quasi-scientific, but it was also super intuitive, right? So we didn't sit there. It wasn't like, those of you who know about art education, it wasn't like going to an old academy and they still have these academies in the United States, where you'd be sitting there and measuring things with calipers. Everything would be theoretical. Everybody would do the exact same painting in class. It wasn't that restrictive, but it was all about observation. It's all about asking ourselves, what are we seeing? And then what happens when we make a decision to put a mark down on a two-dimensional surface? So in some ways, it was very quantitative, which sort of connected to my interest in programming eventually, but I was totally clueless about this at the time. These were really large-scale outdoor paintings. This was a important series for me because it was kind of me finally getting a little bit out of my way in terms of being a student and kind of making paintings. So I did these outside. This is an 84 by 96 inch painting that I built a system to actually put it outside, and I painted it from observation because I was so obsessed with this idea of data. I didn't trust myself to invent, which maybe sounds kind of bizarre, but at the time I needed to have like a motif, something in front of me that I would react to. And then of course I'm making all sorts of decisions in how I reduce that information to a series of marks. So these paintings in many ways are sort of abstract paintings that are kind of based on observational data. And this work all came into a show in New York at the Bowery Gallery. And I thought, honestly, at this point in my career, this is around 99, that I had found my path. I actually got a position teaching painting and drawing at Seton Hall University in New Jersey, right near Manhattan. And I thought this was going to be the trajectory of my career. I wasn't quite right. The work eventually became into kind of more of a pure abstraction. So there was a big jump from those paintings where I was looking at data to a more abstract sort of kind of quantitative approach. These were still very intuitively painted, but now I'm asking myself strictly about formal properties of painting. And at this point now, I was feeling this was enough to make a painting. I was already messing a little bit with coding computation, and I think that was starting to inform or really, really deconstruct all the brainwashing I'd had in terms of my early art education. And this is a really important principle for me about how we're brainwashed in formal education, and then we have to sort of kind of take the parts that are relevant and then really figure this stuff out for ourselves. When I started teaching, I realized how badly I was brainwashed. And I try not to do that as much to my students, but of course I probably still do to some degree. And so these were almost like music, right? I'm thinking about the vector of the mark, color relationships, these kind of patterns going through, all this stuff. And I'm thinking this is enough to make a painting, which of course it is, especially in the times we live in, but it was a big step for me to do this. And I think, again, thinking about algorithms and code was having a big influence on my painting, even though it was sort of a war for a while, okay? So, of course, I had to deal with reality like everybody else and how to make a living and stuff. And so I was teaching a little bit and, making essentially poverty level income. And, it was rough, like always is for young art students, but, we were scraping by. And then I decided I need to do something else. I was actually married and have a little baby coming, and we were barely making any money. So I have an uncle who he was building early PCs, early computers. Again, this is in like the early 2000s. And he said, him and his friend who worked at this university said, computer graphics. I should look into computer graphics. So some of you may know the movie The Graduate. It was like plastics, it was computer graphics. So I didn't have any clue what this was. So this is right after I graduated from my graduate program. And what I did is I rented a machine and got some aftermarket, like pirated software and some books and stuff, and just started teaching myself computer graphics to pay the bills. This was totally about don't starve. I had no interest in doing this as an art form. This was going to be to support my painting habit. So I landed up getting involved in design. I knew nothing about design. I always tell my students, like, I came out with this MFA from this fancy school and I thought I knew what I was doing, but I really didn't know shit about design. I went and started working in design and it sucked. And real designers looked at it, just laughed at it. So I spent a long time apprenticing myself to learn a little bit more about design, about typography, early website development type stuff. Again, I didn't learn any of this in my studio art program. It was about sitting there and drawing people and things. I got into early 3D in terms of doing modeling and rendering, and I was constantly asking myself, as I was kind of obsessed with mastering the skills, like, how can I make art out of this? Like, what is this stuff, right? Is it just like, is it commercial art? Is it like this hobby? And so I started making things that were a little bit more conceptual. This is like my matzo balls and the surgical trays. I started taking kitchen objects that my mother taught me to cook, and we used to cook together as a child. And so I started kind of taking these objects and just recreating them in 3D. I didn't know what I was going to do with them. I was just sort of compelled to do this. And this was like my side hustle. This was not my painting, my sort of serious work at the time I was thinking. I had this young son, I would steal his toys and then try to recreate the toys, model them. Like, I was obsessed in terms of getting the dirt in the treads, the kind of hitting on the paint surfaces. Now my students in the grad program I work in are taking 3D modeling and animation, and sometimes complaining about how hard. And I was like, you should have tried teaching yourself this stuff back in the early 2000s. But anyway, I created a film based on this kind of early jet stream plane. Some of you probably played with these things. I was obsessed with these things as a kid, so I created a film. And what I was trying to do this whole time was, how do I make real art out of this? And I was still so biased with thinking what real art was, and I just didn't know if the stuff that I was doing was serious. I didn't know what it was, right? It was this thing I almost did at night and didn't show my painting friends. I certainly wouldn't show my old professors because I was didn't know if it was, what it was. And as I was doing all this computer stuff, I started asking myself, what the hell is going on underneath the computer? And I was hacking at code sometimes, working on freelance jobs, and it always bothered me. I didn't really know what the hell was going on. And I would deliver something and have no clue if it would even work. So once again, I went back to computer manuals and started teaching myself to code. And lo and behold, I found this ridiculous obsession and passion for coding and even the math, which, of course, none of the stuff I learned in school and even in math classes, I was probably drawing caricatures of the teachers and not paying attention. So I had to get these books and teach myself this stuff. The books sucked, which kind of goes into why I wrote that other book. The books basically sucked. They were written for people who had already been convinced they wanted to do this stuff. They were Java text, things like that. And I just started playing at the time with Flash and ActionScript. Some of you may have, if you're of a certain generation, you'll know ActionScript. A little bit Lingo. This is when Macromedia still was around. And I started doing these little experiments with code, just making things move around. And again, didn't know if any of this stuff was serious or nonsense. I just kept doing it. I was completely obsessed. In fact, I was more obsessed with this than anything yet that I had done with the computer. And so again, I'm asking myself, can I do something serious with this? So I started writing software, right? I was getting sort of skilled enough that I could write pieces of software. So I went back to my art education and started saying, well, let's conceptually say I just kind of went back to art school and I could write software to solve all these stupid problems that we were asked to do in some of these theory classes that I hated. So I tried getting through the traditional color theory class. Some of you may have taken a class like that in art school. I dropped it 2 different times. I actually never made it through it because it was so reductive and just boring to me. So I wrote this kind of ridiculous software, this thing called the Color Field Algorithmic Prototyping Console. And the whole idea of the software was it was a piece of conceptual software that actually solved all the problems in that class, but it was ridiculous. It had, like, at the time there was stuff coming out about really ergonomic UIs in terms of web design. I hated that. I wanted to create really disruptive, annoying UIs. And then I had all the calculations show in real time when the thing was calculated, which make the thing super non-performant. But again, I was just trying to play and think about this stuff as art as opposed to just purely engineering. So I did one for, images, and then I started doing one for animation. I got really interested in the physics of motion and teaching myself this, like, how to, move a waveform through a system. And again, I'm kind of going through these books. We didn't have ChatGPT to help us. So it was really slow process for me, kind of some ways a ridiculous thing to do, but I was just pretty obsessed. In this process, I discovered these things called proto-bytes. Well, I created these things called proto-bytes. And when I finally got to the point was I could kind of use the trig and the math and the code to start sort of sculpting forms that had some interest to me aesthetically. So it wasn't just this conceptual, disruptive type thing. It became these objects that I thought were kind of beautiful. And so I created this whole body of these proto-bytes just by messing around with trigger equations and math. And it was a very intuitive process. I would just, like, write some equations and then start tweaking the math. I didn't really think about what the math was going to do. I was just looking at what the output was. And I let the output direct the math, which is eventually the way I started teaching all this stuff to students instead of worrying about teaching the math theory. And this became a really important body for me, this body of proto-bytes, because I felt like I was finally sort of making what I thought was art, I guess, putting this stuff together a little bit. You can see some of the details on some of these. I'm not sure how. I don't know if I can zoom in on that.
Hey, Ira.
Yeah.
Ira, I have a quick question for you on the proto-byte part, just since, like, before you get too far ahead of this. At any point while you were getting into this part, because you just said, like, at this part you really felt like you were starting to make art. What were there people around you that didn't feel that way about this stuff that you were making?
Yeah, well, to be honest, I used to joke that all my painter friends just stopped calling when I started playing with code. And so there were people around the world doing this on sort of online bulletin boards and forums, asking each other questions. But I didn't know really anybody else where I lived, right? It wasn't like the way it is now. And so we had this little community very thinly spread around the world. And then the different pieces of software, sort of like what's happening with you guys, like around processing or around ActionScript, there were these little communities, right? Without the benefits of Discords and things like that. And so those were the people we would talk to. And then I started bringing it in where I was teaching to try to, basically proselytize and convert the students into doing it. So the students became sort of, that I was working with became my support often, but the faculty were not interested at all.
Amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the right way. Sorry. So, I got really into thinking about the algorithms and thinking about algorithms as a creative medium. So this was kind of an example of a very classic algorithm called a Lindenmayer system or an L system, where we realized that in nature, there are these things that we can kind of reverse engineer, and then we can kind of write fairly simple algorithms to start generating natural processes. So obviously, in the 3D and special effects world, they've gone crazy with this sort of thing, as you can imagine. But so I would start bringing this into my classrooms with the students, and randomization became what I was looking for. So the problem with, like, Photoshop or anything before generative AI, really, honestly, and before coding, was everything was so deterministic. So the engineering impulse is to make things foolproof, to make them as deterministic as possible. But artists need fuzzy, in my opinion, much less deterministic materials to kind of improvise. And art for me is all about improvisation. So you make a mark with charcoal or paint, or you push the clay in or whatever, you never get what you want. You always get, if you're lucky, you get 70, 80% of what you want. And then you either get really pissed off and become super uptight, or you just think, well, look what actually was created, regardless of what my conscious mind wanted to do, and you learn to roll with that. So the trick to becoming an artist in many ways is learning to recognize these things and learning how to pivot and improvise. And that took a long time to learn for me. I mean, I think it's a long time to learn that because you have to really know about yourself. Anyway, the problem with computer graphics up to that point was everything was just moving into this like undo, redo ad nauseum, right? So I actually used to do this little lecture about the hegemony of undo, because it removed all the friction from the creative process. And I even did some literally A/B testing in the classroom with software that I wrote that created chaos and didn't give students what they wanted, and then using like Adobe Illustrator. And invariably the stuff that was more chaotic produced better work, right? Because it forces people into that discomfort, into improvisation where humans really are their best, in my opinion. So when I started adding randomization, albeit it's pseudo randomization, but at least when I started adding randomization in coding, it showed me that I could have output that I didn't know was going to happen, and then I could respond to it the way I would with a physical material. And so that was a huge breakthrough for me when I realized that randomization was sort of the material connection to physical materials. So, I told you the book sucked when I was coming up, and I hope there's no old school Java authors in the audience, but for me, they sucked. So I ended up writing 3 books on creative coding for artists, and then even I got approached by some computer scientists to do this in the computer science classroom, because we realized that to reach a really diverse audience of different types of learning styles and backgrounds, we needed a different approach than the traditional engineering approach teaching computer science. And so we had a lot of success with this. And you're seeing now these kinds of courses taught in art departments all around the world. At the time, there was like 6 places, right? Maybe 4 places. So the book was really important to me. I spent a long time writing these books. They helped me, advance my academic career, but, they took me away from making art, honestly. And processing became this amazing movement, right? It really became, it brought up a whole generation. The stuff we're seeing now with the whole NFT space and generative art is all on the shoulders of what happened in processing for 20 years. So, at the time I thought it was about creative coding. I really thought I had found my thing, right? And lo and behold, I realized later on it was about generativity and emergence. And this is where generative AI, changed my life in a sense. And I'll talk about that bridge. So along this process, I kept thinking to myself, what is generativity and what is an algorithm? Can human beings have are we really embodied algorithms? And then the computer is sort of this model of us. So I did a lot of these drawings, these automatic drawings. And the way I would do these is there was no set idea. I would start scribbling. It wouldn't start like this. And then I would just simply look at it and scribble more until I saw some kind of pattern emerge. And then I would just articulate what I was seeing. And I had no control or no idea what was going to come out, right? So we sometimes call it as automatic drawing, but I'm also looking for some kind of pattern recognition, right? So now we think about noising and denoising. We think about what's happening sort of in the model of a generative AI. It's kind of an embodiment of that in some ways that I felt there was a kind of a real metaphor that I was doing this almost intuitively. And then some of it led to figuration as well. So I realized that I had a bias originally for figuration. Then I had a bias against figuration. And then I realized that sometimes when I was doing the automatic drawing, I was actually seeing figuration. And I thought, well, it's crazy not to just articulate that as well. So the problem with the figuration was that I didn't have 20 years of working in an academy where I was doing the same thing everybody was doing and measuring things. So my skills in figuration were sort of limited. And so I could do some things with this, but it always felt like it was still fairly limited compared to working purely non-objectively, even though I really like this drawing is a really important drawing for me. So there was a bridge problem. The bridge problem was we had painting, this history of a couple hundred years of painting, where there was a very set path of becoming an apprentice, training your hand and your eye, training your ability to understand color operations, maybe glazing, depending on how far back you go. And then we had all this coding stuff, which was really mathematical and awesome for geometry, but no one's going to write an algorithm to generate a Piero della Francesca or Leonardo da Vinci, right? There's no way to write code, no matter how good a code writer you are. You're not going to write an algorithm to generate a master painting from the 14th century, okay, or 15th century. So we had this bridge problem, and it always bothered me that I had painting and I had coding and I could do the drawing, but something was missing. Until I came to generative AI. So my first time, this is not my first pieces. These are pieces done with AI. So my first thing with generative AI was I fed in one of my own drawings. And then I started doing these really subtle, doing an image to image with really, really low level of noising strength, so I could get variations of my drawing. And this shocked my world in the best possible way, right? Because once I started doing this, I realized that somehow I felt like I was going back in time hundreds of years ago, and I had this leveling technology of not being apprenticed when I was 10 years old in a guild, but I had this tool to work as a collaborator to kind of bridge this for me. And so I was able to, the painting on the left is a painting I did from observation, and then I fed it into Stable Diffusion. And I didn't at the time totally grasp what this was going to turn into, but I knew that nothing would be the same for me again. And it was like the 20 years of doing generative coding was now fully actualized in the generative AI. And so many people felt like, oh, this is a new thing. And for me, it was just like the evolution of what had been happening for 20 plus years. Like this was just the absolute most logical next thing to happen. I just didn't know it was going to happen. So I started, convening, I started hanging out with Piero della Francesca and Albrecht Dürer and all these old 15th century, 16th century artists through Stable Diffusion. I just would kind of prompt with them and then feed my work in there. And so all of a sudden now my drawings are hanging out with Piero's drawings. And for someone like me who was brought up on this stuff, when I go to London and I stand in the National Gallery in front of Piero della Francesca, it is a religious experience for me. And I'm not a religious person, right? That is the most moving experience for me. So this was shocking to me, this whole experience. I started taking some of my code pieces. The piece on the left was, remember the proto-bytes I did many years ago? I finally had decent coding chops where I could now code the thing on the left purely with math and code, and it's actually three-dimensional and interactive. So that took, 20 years of coding, but then I fed it into Stable Diffusion, and the image on the right, it's as if it had rendered a patina, the surface on the geometry. It was amazing, right? I was just shocked at how subtle I could tweak the state, the AI to just literally finish the wireframe of the code that I had generated. And then I just kind of dove in and just stopped doing everything. The painting, the drawing, everything, the coding was all gone. And all I did for, 2 years maybe is just generate AI projects. At the same time, I got really involved in the NFT space. And the reason I got involved in the NFT space was not because of the hype and apes and all that kind of crap. It was because the generative NFT stuff happening on art blocks and FX hash was a total natural extension of what we had been doing for 20 years with Flash and processing, right? It was like for the first time in our lives, we as artists who were working with code instead of paint or charcoal had a marketplace because the galleries would never take us seriously. It was just like, what are you doing with this code stuff? We were able to now start selling our NFTs, not for millions of dollars like CryptoPunks or Bored Apes, but for $5, $10 to our artist friends and some collectors in the space. And we were able to actually make a little bit of money for our labor. And it was mind-blowing. So that for me started with generative code, and then it quickly became AI for me as well. And so this is on the object.com site, and I just created project after project on this space, which was super exciting. And I started kind of thinking about more kind of slower projects that would take me a little more time. This was a project that showed Gazelli Gazzelli Art House in London. This is we started, I'll talk about this with MProps in a second. We started coining these ideas of long form, medium form, and short form. So there had been long form generative art on art blocks, which was pioneered in art blocks. And that's the idea of, you have an algorithm, you can create a whole bunch of instances and you're going to get variation in the outputs, but they'll still be sort of connected. And we didn't have that in AI at the time, right? In fact, there was no connection between what was happening in generative AI and blockchain, except people would maybe render things and then put them up there. So Braindrops was a real pioneering platform. People would pre-render things and then they would be given to Braindrops. Braindrops would randomly allow people to mint them when they minted them, but it wasn't generated in real time. So I was involved with a generative coding platform called Emergent Properties, and I met with them and we talked and we said, why don't we, one of the other partners, Emil, he's also a painter and a coder and stuff like that. And so we were messing with this stuff and we said to our partners, why don't we put generative AI together with this blockchain? And nobody had done it. So that's what Emergent Properties turned into, was the first kind of long form generative AI platform. We also eventually had short form and medium form. So in the short form, I pre-rendered these. These were mostly done in Midjourney. I was obsessed with getting really, really high fidelity images and insane detail in these. And I spent a long time on these images. But Midjourney proved, I go back and forth between a bunch of different tools. And so these, we pre-did these in Midjourney and then we output them randomly like Braindrops did. So it's a little different. And this is the medium form. So I'm sorry, I'm saying this wrong actually. The short form is we pre-render them, people buy them, they see them, they pick the one they want. The medium form, which was done on Braindrops, was these were all pre-rendered and then they were randomly selected at minting. When people would mint, they would get one. So this was the project on Braindrops I did based on this mapping idea. And then the first project I did, which was, we believe the first long form generative AI project ever, was called Oracles. And this was what we used to sort of launch Emergent Properties, the AI version. So there were 1,000 of these oracles, and this was all done with Stable Diffusion. And so this is actually an older version. I can actually show you also the new interface. This is Emergent Properties. We have an open studio, we have an open marketplace, and we're actually, well, I won't go into that. I don't know if I'm supposed to, but let me just pop this open for a second. Actually, go back for a second. So what Emergent Property does is it takes essentially, automatic 1111's work in the back end. And we can also use Comfy and things like that. But it takes the kind of a web UI. We've written sort of our own web UI on top of it, and we can generate images with Stable Diffusion, and we can use different models. And I'll show you the actual thing in real time, but you can change all the settings that you're normally used to setting. The artist then can store all these things in these flat file system, create collections, and then they can press one button and actually publish an NFT collection right from the platform on either Tezos or Ethereum blockchain. So we actually have a new version of it now, which looks like this, and you can see a live project in there. So this was a recent project I did on these kind of mathematical flowers, and this is the newer interface. And you can see that on the left side here, where we can select different models. We have the ability to use a refiner, our positive, negative prompts, and then we can control things like all the stuff you'd normally do if you're working with Stable Diffusion, sampling, scale, et cetera, et cetera. We also have an enhancer, and we also have the ability to do upscaling right in the system. One other thing we've always had early on, because we come from this like generative coding background, is we've got the ability to use a p5.js, so a code-based interface to allow somebody to kind of say pre-render an image to image, and then that image to image goes into Stable Diffusion, and the whole pipeline is integrated. And we also have a variable system, so we can create variables, and then we can put the variables in our code. You can see right over here, there's a variable. So every time this thing runs on the blockchain, it gives you a different randomized output, which could be weighted or just random, normally randomized. Yeah, and so again, we can store our assets, and we can then go ahead and just give you a quick sense how that works. You can just go ahead and publish. I won't publish because it's already published, but I could then Maybe because it's published, it won't let me do that again. Oh, there it is. And so right over here, I can then go ahead and set the parameters for publishing, and I can just literally hit the word publish, and this will go live. And where this will go live is on the mprops. I'll show you what it looks like on the mprops open marketplace. And so if you go into the marketplace, you can actually see the projects that are live here. And for instance, this one's minting now. I can just click on it, and if I mint one, is this one sold out? No, there's 31 unminted. My wallet's not connected, but I could then mint it, and I would get one of these tokens. So it's all integrated into mprops. And that's all I prepared, but I'd love to answer any questions.
Man, that is awesome. So on like a day-to-day basis right now, what does your normal AI usage look like as it stands with all the tools that are currently available? Like, what do you find yourself using the most? What's kind of your favorite? What do you feel generally pulled towards?
Yeah, so I mean, it's always been for me when I'm just doing AI. It's always been Mid-Journey, Stable Diffusion, and some DALL-E 3. So those are the three I tend to use. But a lot of what I'm doing now, and I didn't really talk about the residency, is trying to build bridges between an analog material-based practice and the AI and coding. Just kind of put them all together into processes.
Gotcha. And has the NFT collection for, like, since you started doing the NFTs, has it been mostly well received?
Yeah, I mean, I've had a very fortunately very good experience in the NFT space in terms of selling a lot of NFTs.
Awesome. We got a question from Twitch. How do you balance the technical aspects of working with AI in your art with the intuitive process of creativity?
Yeah, well, I actually think coding and working with the AI tools is quite intuitive also. It's maybe different because you're thinking a little differently, maybe like writing, but I find it all very intuitive. I don't find a big separation. What I do find though is, for me personally, I gain some health or sanity through working with my hands sometimes in a kind of physical way. And so that's why I like going back and forth. So for instance, in these drawings, like I'll typically draw automatically and then I'll get stuck and then I'll put the drawing into Stable Diffusion with, again, very low denoising strength to get some insights to go back into the drawing. And then there's other times, the project becomes totally AI. Like I have a project that's releasing tomorrow with a bunch of people on Highlight, and it's actually 100% AI. So I'm doing sort of all those different things, but I am really interested in that kind of those connections.
Awesome. Trey Monkey, thank you for that question. Freedom from Mars in the Discord chat says, seeing that you seem to mostly have moved away from the procedural algorithmic approaches to generative art and onto AI, do you think it still has a place today? Because he says, because I kind of miss the weird emergent behavior of the former and feel like there's a whole space to be explored in combining them.
Yeah, no, that's something maybe I wasn't clear about that. We're still doing that a lot. I mean, that's partly with emergent properties too. No, I still do code projects. I'm still writing code. And one thing I've been working on, again, if you know my sort of Twitter X stream, you'd seen this, is that I've been working on systems to algorithmically animate or move the AI output without using like a runway or the newer things people are doing now. I'm kind of looking for different ways of animating AI content, including potentially putting that into an entire pipeline like on emergent property. So imagine that you generate an image with code. The code then prompts something to generate an image with AI. You then generate something else with code. The image from the AI gets mapped to the geometry, and then the whole thing is interactive and animated, right? And imagine that's all one pipeline. So those are things that I'm really interested in. So I'm super interested still in coding. It's not like I'm doing all that stuff. It's all additive. Nothing's at this point being removed.
Very cool, man. Nate asks, have you tried Comfy UI?
I played with Comfy UI, and I probably should put more time into Comfy UI. It's just a matter of time. But yeah, I have.
It's funny when you were showing some of the earlier sketches right before you got into the AI part. Some of the guys in the chat were saying that it looks like the Comfy UI node noodles, and that our entire future was foretold by the artist.
Yeah, I mean, again, if you look at generative art from 20 years ago, you see all that stuff. Like, we were all obsessed with those things. It's funny. And then, programs like Max MSP and Real Data, is it's called, the one they're an audio program, or Jitter, that was part of Max MSP. Those are all node-based programming environments.
The thing that's really great, especially now with the direction that LLMs and everything has went, is even with stuff like P5.js, you don't even necessarily need to know how to code. If you want to start making generative stuff in that program, you can go to ChatGPT or Claude, and as long as you can explain to it and you're willing to have the conversation back and forth with the LLM about what it is you visually want to see, it'll write the code for you, and you can use that to iterate. And then you can take the generation from P5.js and run that through something like Animate Diff in Comfy. And now we're talking like entirely new things.
Absolutely. I mean, so I teach a lot of coding still. And my students, this is an experiment right now. The students who are working with ChatGPT early on, the students who are not, I didn't have that benefit. What is that going to do in terms of literacy later on? We don't know. And does it matter? We don't know that either.
I guess that's the big question, is like, what does it matter anymore? I think it's really great for creativity in general, how the barrier to entry is coming down while the technical skill ceiling is still remaining extremely high for as deep as you want to go in all this stuff. Let's see. Do we have any more questions here? Not that I see right now. Guys, do you guys have any questions for Ira? In the meantime, Ira, is there something like currently you're working on in the Civitai AiR program that you want to talk about at all?
Yeah. Let me see if I can. Let me share you guys still see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. Chris got me working on Figma. I'm pretty lame with Figma, so don't laugh when you see what I'm doing here. So I'm just trying to put things together. So for instance, here's a project, and I guess this will probably be shared through Discord, I'm assuming. So this is a drawing that's actually on my studio wall right now behind me that I've been working on. And so you can see, so this is just an automatic drawing. I've been always kind of interested in these kind of flying figure things. And so I just kind of do this stuff out of my head as best I can. And then on the right, I'm feeding it into Stable Diffusion to try to get insights. And I'll just keep going back and forth with this process. And it's not like it's so literal. I'm not sitting there and studying details here. It's more like I look at these things and then I go back to the drawing and just see what comes out. And so this is like an iterative process. You can see how it starts. And I actually recorded, you can see the really early stages of this. And I recorded sort of, I talked a little bit about it in some of these videos and things like that. So that might be, I don't know, potentially of interest. And that's what I'm going to keep doing, and probably move to painting at some point too. So that's what I'm working on a lot for this residency is these kind of drawing AI insight things.
That's amazing, man. I can't wait to see what that kind of looks like by the time the residency program is wrapped up. I just spotted a really great question over in the Twitch chat, which says, "You are the inventor of the term super generative. Can you elaborate on what does it mean for you long-term from AI? What does it mean for you in the long-term form, AI for art? Thoughts on state of the future and gamification in art and AI?"
Yeah, well, I don't think I've coined super generative. If I did, I'm not aware of it. I feel like was involved in long form generative AI, medium form generative AI, and short form generative AI. But in terms of, so I think if I understood the question is, and maybe I'm reading too much into it, is how is the art world and this kind of computing world all going to come together? Like, because right now what's happening is the traditional art world is sort of like what's happening with crypto and TradFi, right? If you follow crypto at all. So they're interested when it's relevant, they can make money and they understand it. But once there starts becoming too much effort or they're not seeing returns, there's not a lot of interest, right? So in the traditional art world, I think there's still a lot of distrust of digital. And that's one of the benefits of blockchain. I know there's a lot of things wrong with crypto and blockchain, but one of the benefits of blockchain is provenance. So the biggest problem, I mean, years ago, I met with this guy who runs Bitform's gallery. And what he was talking about was the problem of how do you verify that something's real, right? Because we can copy things digitally perfectly. And so how do I know that I have the original one and I don't have some kind of copy of it? And blockchain solved that, right? Because when something's created, it gets put in a ledger that's public, that this thing was created or purchased at a certain time, and nobody can say it's theirs because it's in the ledger, right? So all of a sudden now, digital assets have the same rarity and ability to be collected like physical assets. So there's no reason that galleries and institutions can't trade in this stuff now, because that argument is no longer there. But many of the people that run these institutions are older. They're not digital natives. They're certainly not blockchain natives. And so there's still a long disconnect. Some galleries, Expanded Art and Kate Voss Gallery and, Unity in London and Gazzelli, some of them are trying to get into this space, but it's difficult, right? Their collector base doesn't really understand. And so there's just a long latency between what's happening now on the cutting edge, which we're all in because we're in this space right now, and then what's been going on in the traditional art world. And I think the same kind of resistance you're seeing in the commercial art world, this fear of people losing their jobs and everything being copied and all this stuff. I think this is just like, in my opinion, mostly just people's anxiety about change, and that this stuff will all get sorted out. And that there will be value to these digital assets, and we won't even worry. I mean, my children, right? They were buying digital assets when I didn't want them to for years, right? I'm sure many of you in this room have done the same. Those were valuable to them. It didn't seem like nonsense to them. So that generation will fix all this stuff.
So I have a question for you, since you've kind of had your foot in all these different areas of art, period. What we hear a lot from the traditional art community about kind of the gray area of these models being trained on artists' work without their permission. How do you view that, given that, okay, some people make things that are like blatant, like you can see what artist this came from, what style it is, and what character this is. But if the work that comes out the other end in the final output is completely transformative, how do you feel about that line, and where does that line kind of get drawn?
Yeah, I mean, I have, as you might imagine, I don't worry about that at all personally. If I think it's awesome. People want to copy my stuff. People were pirating my book pretty early on, and that was fun. They wanted to read it. But I mean, artists have been, we steal from each other. That's the way we learn. That's the way we grow. That's the way we make things, right? People had cameras. You could have taken photographs of paintings for 150 years. I mean, and people had the ability to do really, really good fraudulent copies of things with painting and drawing at one point. I think it's a small percentage of people that are going to want to do that anyway, but it's not an issue for me at all, right? I just don't think it's an issue at all. I also think that most of the people that are critical of AI haven't used it very much, and they don't realize how hard it is to still make good art. Like, it's such a joke to me that people think because the tools are powerful, you're going to make better art. For now, I guess there's still this novelty effect. And the first time somebody sees this, photorealistic woman generated, they think, oh my God, it's amazing. Then you see 10,000, you realize, okay, that's not really that big a deal. So I just think it's going to take a while for people to just dismiss all the that stuff and see what's really of high quality.
I definitely agree. I definitely agree. My kind of my personal view on it was always like, if I get inspired by something someone made, and if I was to just try to copy that and use that as inspiration for what I'm currently making, if my output, no AI included, is going to have some trace of that thing that originally inspired me. The only difference is now we can take that inspiration and use it at scale.
Right. I mean, we're trying to address this with emergent properties. I'm less interested in this than some of my partners are, but we're trying to build sort of essentially an attribution graph so that when you generate the work, and you want to reference other artists that are living, presumably, that'll actually they'll receive some sort of credit for that, and there'll be a graph, like kind of a graph in terms of building relationships of where are the attributions of a work of art, and that those things could have some type of remuneration in terms of royalties, things like that. So we are kind of thinking about that as a long-term model.
Dude, these things you have on the screen right now look really cool. Is there any way to make the one in the middle bigger with the two angels in the ocean?
Yes. Yeah, so this is the project that's dropping tomorrow on Highlight. It's part of a group project with a bunch of amazing artists. Honestly, it's worth checking out this thing. So it was inspired by the Mediterranean, because it's actually taking place on the island of Menorca. So it's a live in real life show on Menorca, but there's also going to be a drop with it as well. So I created 40 pieces. It's called the Kingdom of Pontus. Pontus was sort of the primordial sort of god of that region. And so that this project was based on, it's all AI.
Super cool, man. What were these? Was this Stable Diffusion or Midjourney or?
These were done with Midjourney.
Gotcha. And I saw on the actual project page that the creator, if sold, gets a 10% royalty for the life of the NFT.
Yeah, so that probably won't be enforced by the platforms that sell it, but yeah, one of the nice things, one of the early promises of the NFT space was that artists would receive royalties when things were sold on the secondary market between collectors. On certain blockchains that works, and the Ethereum blockchain, unfortunately, the main marketplaces don't necessarily enforce it. But we put it in there anyway for hopes.
Dude, well, everything looks awesome, and it's like looking at your stuff, you can clearly tell that you go the extra beyond the extra mile to really make something unique that, like, because I looked at this and I couldn't work out if there was something other than just AI worked into the images. So to me, I feel like that's a huge win.
Yeah, I mean, I'm always trying to subvert the AI's tendencies, right? So one of the problems with Midjourney, as many of you know, is it's just really slick, right? It's just it's hard to get raw stuff out of Midjourney. It's so fine-tuned and it's super impressive in certain areas. But I don't want to, me personally, my aesthetic, I don't want to create these super polished things. I want there to be, I want to see wireframes and distortion and random numbers and all this other kind of stuff relating to my interest in generative art. And so I have to sort of play against Midjourney's own tendencies, and sort of deconstruct its own algorithm in a sense to get those kinds of outputs. But that's just my own personal bias. And Stable Diffusion is actually generally better at this. I have more control, but I can't quite sometimes get the same level of polish that I get out of Midjourney for certain things, certain types of images.
Do you have a favorite upscaler or kind of finalization process once you get an image that you're really happy with?
It varies for projects. We have a whole bunch of upscalers. I mean, we probably have all the ones that you can put in automatic 1111. So I just try the different ones and look at outputs. So, but I mean, these were done with SDXL1. We have some other models in there, but I just like the way that I was getting the output from that. So,
and have you tried animating any of these images yet?
I have, yeah. So I am working on some animated projects. I don't like most of the current tech even the new Sumo one. I don't have enough control, so I use them, but I haven't released any projects. I haven't sold any projects with that yet. So I have this, again, my own approach to moving the AI. If you have a second, I'll show you one of these.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm going to Twitter because I don't remember any fast way to get stuff. Man, I post too much. Okay, I think they're coming up in a second. Yeah, so you can see, so what you're seeing here in this piece, for instance, is this was an AI output out of Midjourney. These kind of really interested in these clusters of people. And then I attached it to geometry with code to sort of mess with the animation. And so I'm working on a whole series of studies like that, where in this piece, the image was generated with the AI. I'm kind of using a Verlet integration system. People know what that is, just a way of kind of propagating sort of physics through a surface. But then the stuff on the outside, those tendrils are actually just code generated. So I'm sort of integrating the AI with the code. And just trying to find different ways of playing with that. I see there's a few more that kind of came out.
That was really, I really liked that one. That was really cool.
Yeah, this kind of reveals, you can see sort of what's happening. So those lines that are being generated are me connecting these Verlet nodes with a bunch of extra lines to keep the thing from just totally turning into chaos. You can see here how it sort of works. And then remember the proto-bytes? So I'm sort of taking my proto-bytes and generating imagery with the AI and then animating these as well. But again, I haven't released any of this stuff yet, but been working on these processes.
I really like that, man. If that could turn into a perfect loop somehow, that would be perfect.
Yeah, it's coming. Yeah.
Awesome, man. I don't see any other questions, but Ira, why don't you let everyone know where they can find you if they want to keep up with you after we log off here?
Yeah, so I post mostly through Twitter, through X, for better or worse. A little bit on Instagram and Facebook and Threads. But if you go to, it's just at Ira Greenberg, you'll see everything. It all comes through X.
Awesome. Well, here, last question. One of our Discord members asked if you work on a 4090.
I actually have right now 3080 on an Alienware desktop. That's my main machine, and I keep wondering if I'd get much better performance if I went to a 4090. So I do sometimes run Latent Diffusion locally, and I have the benefit too of running this thing on a computer cluster at the university sometimes. And then I get some sick performance. But a lot of times I'm working in emergent properties though. I just use our own tool because we go out to commercial, GPUs out there. So
great. Ira, do you mind if I actually show you something real quick?
Love to see it.
Awesome. So because the let me pull the Discord off here. There's just something that I haven't posted anywhere that I think you would really like based on what you just showed me. So let me just go ahead and open this up right here. Boom.
If anybody wants to, so I was just wondering, is it worth upgrading to the 4090? Spending the money from a 3080?
Absolutely. When I made the jump from a 3090 to a 4090, it's literally double the performance.
Okay, awesome.
Okay, so this is a video to video using reference images.
Where did you share that?
Oh, if you it should be somewhere if you like click out into the Discord chat, you should see my screen.
I'm seeing you, but I'm not seeing. Let's see here.
Discord, can you guys see my screen? Or am I only sharing my screen to myself somehow? Yep, they can see it. So if you click the little grid in maybe the top right, it should bring up the grid of everyone, and then I think you can see my screen.
I see the grid. I mean, I'm looking at all the people on the grid. If I click on you, I'm still not seeing your screen at all.
Oh, here, you know what? Boom, there we go.
Oh, now I'm seeing it.
Okay, perfect. Here, let me play that again. So I got a couple things here. I was trying to mess with the idea of kind of like under the microscope.
Oh yeah, that's very cool.
And these were all done in Animate Diff in my Comfy UI workflow.
Yeah, those are beautiful.
And for the people that like a little bit of weird stuff. But yeah, no, Ira, dude, this was absolutely fantastic. It was a really great change of pace from just like what we usually have on here, and I definitely learned a lot. And it was super interesting just hearing about like your journey. Your journey in general, going from just like regular art to being obsessed with 3D modeling to the point of trying to get like the dirt texture in the tires and modeling your kids' toys to how you've ended up where you are right now, and seeing just like the constant adaptation that you've had as all the new tools have came out, I think is something that a lot of us could take really big gems away from and learn a lot from, is that like we don't have to get stuck in the tool that we are currently using.
Yeah. I mean, the learning curve is the most fun thing, right?
So with that being said, man, you have any final words you want to say before we kind of do the sign off here?
No, just again, thanks everybody for taking the time. So it's really my privilege to be able to talk about this stuff. So thank you guys.
Awesome. No, well, Ira, thank you. Guys, go ahead and follow Ira on his X account, which is at Ira Greenberg. It's his name. We'll go ahead and post that link. This will be posted to YouTube within the next day or two. I'll try to get up for you guys first thing tomorrow morning. And yeah, all of Ira's links will be in the description on YouTube. If any of you guys want to watch this back, I'll go ahead and publish this on Twitch right away so you can watch the VOD back. Yeah, no, Ira, thank you so much. And we'll definitely circle back with you to see how the Civitai Artist in Residency stuff is going.
Awesome. Thanks again, Tyler. And thanks, everybody.
Thanks, you,
Ira.
Chris, do you have any kind of closing remarks before we sign out of here?
If anybody wants to keep up with what Ira's doing, they can go to air.civitai.com and then I think /studio, or just click on the studio button, and his Figma board, which he's working in, posting all of his process, video updates, things like that. That's available on the AiR website. So you can kind of keep up to date with his AiR project. And then of course, follow him on X and all that. But yeah, that's the only thing I got. So thanks so much, Ira. That was awesome.
Amazing. Well, guys, before we get out of here, let me remind you, tomorrow, Thursday, we are not doing AI video and animation. We actually have 2 more guest streams this week. Tomorrow, we're going to have Willis Visual on. If you guys don't know, Willis is responsible for inspiring a lot of us earlier in the year with Warp Fusion. And we're just going to talk about the past year in AI and kind of his journey through everything, because he has quite the story, because that man is a full-time dentist while also inspiring all of us on the AI side of things. And then on Friday, we have Make It Rad. If you guys do not know who Make It Rad is, you need to look him up on Twitter or X. He makes some absolutely insane architectural and structural animate diffs, and all of his stuff is super high quality. And do not forget to follow us on X at Civitai. And also we have a separate X for the Civitai AiR program at Civitai AiR. So, as always, guys, we appreciate you all. We'll see you tomorrow and Friday, same place, same time, 3 p.m. Pacific. My name is Tyler. This is civetti.com. Twitch, we are out. Catch you guys tomorrow. All right.